Come again?
I said we're already right in the middle of something.
Oh yeah, I got right into it. Sorry about that. I should have waited for the recording there.
No problem. None at all. In fact, I invited you into it.
Yeah, I stumbled
So,
into it.
let me ask you this question as a kind of a strange question. Did you get that view about dry from me?
No,
Where did you get it from?
I guess just my general Dhamma knowledge, which is like
So
some
it's
book.
kind of general knowledge, then, is what you're saying.
Yeah, it's at the very least it's pretty much a widespread view on the internet as well.
Uh huh.
I'm beginning to suspect some sort of trap here.
Okay. You just heard the click. Okay.
I should have been more careful about what I said. I was, yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, this is good. By the way, I have done retreat with the Mahasi from Upandita himself, who was the one who was at that time just taking over from the deceased Mahasi back in 1983. Yeah, so, something like that. Uh, I had gone to Burma, but the visa wasn't very long. And so I met him there, and he was saying, "Oh, well, I'm going to be in Penang soon." And so I met him there and did a retreat with him. And as far as I remember, it was the hardest retreat that I have ever done. And I had done plenty of retreats before, and that was a really, really tough one. Partly because it was delivered in Burmese with a Chinese translator, which meant the lectures were twice as long, and I didn't understand any of it. So that was a whole an interesting part of it. The floors seemed to be harder than any of the floors that I've ever stood on.
Yeah, this might be a good point in time to mention that I actually also signed up for retreat in the Mahasi tradition. Um, I'm looking to explore that, so I'll be going on a 15-day retreat at the end of May.
Uh-huh. Well, one of the things that I have come out of with the experiment with the Mahasi is the issue about the noting, not the issue about the dry. Okay, so the issue about the noting, I think, in fact, we've talked about this before, about how strong is the note going to be.
No, as far as I remember, we never talked about this.
Okay. Um, think about it in this context. The context that I use is the English language word witness, because it's used in distinctly two different systems or two different ways of looking at it. One of the ways of looking at it is a witness is one who saw what happened or sees what's happening. Okay. And then the second kind of witness is the one who is on the witness stand telling a
Yeah,
story
yeah.
about what has happened. Okay.
This we talked about. This I remember.
All right. So this is it. What kind of noting are you going to be doing? Are you going to be noting in the sense of perhaps a very strong labeling? Because the stronger the labeling that you use, the less noting that can be done.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is because the delay in the mind during the processing cycle, which is called perception. And so the idea then with the noting, if you're doing it correctly, will take you right into jhana simply because, yeah, right.
That sounds good. Getting a 2-for-1 deal here.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I'm attacking the entire idea or process of dry in the context of where's the juice, because normally the question is for the jhana dudes, where's the juice?
Oh,
If you're
okay.
going to have the wet practice, where's the juice in it? Because with the Mahasi, or if you talk about it as the sense of Vipassana, and by the way, the Mahasi method is nothing but a westernized interpretation of what is actually done in Burma. And it's got some problems with it. And one of these big problems, see, um, here's the point. If Dhamma is taught in the organized method, then certain amounts are going to be left out, and certain amounts are going to be covered and recovered and stressed and done over and over and over again, almost like the organized system is everybody's in the first grade for a while, and then everybody's in the second grade for a while, and then they have a little ceremony or graduation, a little break, and then they start the third grade and then the fourth grade. By the time they're in the third or the fourth grade, there are some kids who do not belong in the class they're in. They either need to go backwards or to go forward, but in either case, these kids are losing out because they're stuck in an organized method. All right. Here's the indication about that organization. Is one of the key elements of the Mahasi method has to do with rising, falling, touching, sitting as the first things to note. All right. Well, what is the rising? It's the breath, the in breath. What is the falling? That's the out breath.
Yeah.
So the Mahasi method it starts with, obviously, is founded upon Anapanasati. It just does not seem like it because they don't spend a lot of time teaching the entire path. That's one of the things that Bhikkhu Buddhadasa was the most famous for, was that he wanted the students to understand the whole path so that then they could do a better understanding of how they were doing their picking and choosing.
Yeah.
Because in fact there is uh, you may have also heard me say like this, that the path of jhana is the path of the Buddha before he became enlightened.
Yes. Actually, I've heard many different people elaborate on that by now. It's a nice convergence point.
Right, that's exactly the point. Is that that means that if you're on that path, that you're not paying any attention to the Buddha at
Yeah.
all,
Yeah.
not the real Buddha's teaching, until you attain that which it took him 6 years to attain, more or less. In fact, a whole lot less. All right. So let's look at one event. Perhaps you know this story then too. And again, I'm kind of surprised I haven't told you this story. This comes out of Sutta number 36, where he's explaining that he fell into a creek and he was being washed down. I guess there was a lot of moss or whatever. And that he realized that he could not get out of the creek, that he'd slipped and fallen into the creek. If he's not strong enough to get out of the creek, how can he be strong enough to become enlightened? Because in that particular time he was doing a lot of austerities and had gotten quite thin. So that was actually past his samadhi practice days.
Yeah. More of the ascetic practice at that point.
Right. So you can see that in fact he was going to various teachers and doing everything, and in fact besting all of them, and being disappointed with each one. Alakalama, Rama Ramaputta, Naga Nagaputta, who was the Jain or the Tirthankara known as Mahavira. in the sutras is known as Naganataputta, which he actually talked to them about all of this flagellation stuff that he had been doing too. And he had 5 guys that were with him right up to that point when he recognized this is not the right path. And so then's when he sat down and reflected about being under the rose apple tree. When he was at the age of, they say about the age of 12, but we do know from, well, I don't even know where the source of this is, but one of those 5 guys that had been with him right up until this moment was there at his own birth and was his teacher throughout his entire life, and then went with him when he went forth at the age of 29. So this guy must have been about 55 at that time. And then he was also present for the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, which was the first sutta that the Buddha taught. And he was the one who became the Sotapan right then and there. He got it.
Yeah.
Okay. So when the Buddha crawled out of the creek and started thinking that this is not going to do, what is the path to enlightenment, is when he reflected about when he was under the rose apple tree. So this is a very famous passage. I don't know why this is not sometimes used as a bludgeon to beat Culadasa right into the ground. It's so well known that the issue was under the rose apple tree. So there he is while his father is doing a plowing ceremony, which means that all of the townspeople and all the Brahmins and everything was out there. If the king's out there doing a plowing ceremony, it's the big deal. So the young prince goes and sits under the rose apple tree and experiments and works with first jhana. All right. So if he's able to do that at the age of 12 and then recollect upon that at the age of 35, that meant that while he was doing that 6 years of jhana practice or less, he was actually already able to do the first jhana and had just whizzed right past it. He was going up into the higher stuff already. And that he missed the point. And so now he's come back and reflect what is the path to enlightenment is, in fact, this first jhana. Would you mind if I read the passage to you?
Go ahead.
Oh, let me go get the book. It's been moved. I recalled that when my father the Sakyan was occupied while I was sitting in the cool shade of a rose apple tree, quite secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states, I entered upon and abided in the first jhana, and then he describes exactly what it is, which is accompanied by applied and sustained thought. Now, what that means is that you have the ability to think what you want to think about, and you can stay put on it. That's exactly what we need when you're able to read. Okay, because you can, and most people don't read very well because their mind is scattered, and so they'll read a little bit, and then the mind will wander away, and then they come
Yeah.
back eventually.
Can I just interject at that point because, or would you prefer to do the whole thing and then?
Yeah, let's continue on, but make a point about applied and sustained thought. With rapture and pleasure born of seclusion. Now, what we mean by that is, oh, what a relief it is to not have the mind wandering, that we can apply and direct it. So the seclusion is the seclusion from, first off, the world on the outside, but now we're secluded from the world of the hindrances, the world on the inside. And that's a very, very pleasurable place to be completely free from all of the crap of our own mind so that we can put our mind where we want it to be. Okay? And then the next one is, could that be the path to enlightenment? Then, following on that memory, came the realization this is the path to enlightenment. I thought, why am I afraid of that pleasure that has nothing to do with sensual pleasures and unwholesome states? I thought, I am not afraid of that pleasure since it is not since it has nothing to do with sensual pleasures and unwholesome states. All right. So basically, what he's reflecting upon there is back to the Jains that he's just left, that are all against all kinds of pleasure and think that relief from suffering is going to be by burning off old karma, by getting it early, inviting old bad karma to come visit right away. And the
Yeah.
Buddha already recognizes by now that no, what you're doing is actually adding new suffering out of ignorance. That it doesn't burn off old bad karma. All right. I considered it is not easy to attain that pleasure with a body so emaciated. Suppose I eat some fallen food, some boiled rice and bread. All right, so that's basically going on. So that's the big point. If everyone understands that, then they can understand how the system is put together, which I've already discussed with you before, but let's go over it one more time. And that is that now we're talking about Sutta number 48 of how that first jhana now fits into what really needs to be done. Okay. So the Buddha talks about it like this: the very, very first noble step along the path is for the student to consider that no matter how obstructed the mind is, those obstructions can be cleaned out and the mind can be put into this present moment, into the here now, into the reality of now. That's the first noble step. Now, that's actually quite remarkable, as we've talked about before, in the sense that all of Christianity and all of Western society is trying to teach you that you need them, that you're dependent upon them, that you're the victim of something and they can help you somehow, taking Jesus as your savior or whatever
Yeah.
the story may be.
Or
But
buying some expensive stuff if it's an
exactly.
advertisement.
But the noble is one who understands, or basically the first step into nobility is for one to recognize personal responsibility. And that personal responsibility grows. In the beginning, there's a lot of doubt because the beginning is because the mind has been trained. I need something on the outside. I might even need a jhana or two. All right. So the idea then is that no, you can clean out your own mind. And you can do that on a periodic basis. And the more you do it, the gooder or the better at it that you'll get. And the more often that you can recognize that the mind is in hindrance and bring it out, then the more secluded you are, and the more ability you have to have the mind to apply and sustain thought. So that's actually budding jhana now, the ability to clean out the mind. But it's a kind of a later stage when the Buddha puts in that quality of no matter how clouded the mind is, because the mind can get really clouded sometimes. Sometimes good Dhamma dudes can spend months, for instance, in competition and not know that they're stuck in competition. Okay, so there are many different things that we can look at it like that. But when the mind is free from hindrances, and we recognize that no matter how much the mind is obstructed, we can clean it out. Now that's really relief. All right, so this is actually the step that's based upon a basis of practice that is not just momentary or the very first beginner. This is something that's acquired over time. The ability to keep coming out of the hindrances and coming back into the here now, over and over and over again. You could almost go so far as to call this access concentration if you actually want to go into that part of the literature.
Yeah, actually, this is really frustrating for me a lot of the time, because seemingly everyone uses these words differently. And there's about 20 different definitions of these words, like each of them floating around. So I can really see the connection to jhana practice at this point, because basically in the jhanic state, the hindrances are at least temporarily suppressed, right? So there's no hindrances at that time. So
Exactly.
by repeatedly cleaning out the hindrances and coming back to the present moment, that is obviously cultivating something that is also present in the jhanas. So
Exactly.
I see that connection. That makes a lot of sense, and I hadn't seen that before, so that's good.
Okay. In this regard, there is no distinction. Okay. The next one is when we come through that act. Let me back up at least a minute about that word access concentration. The word access is appropriate. The word concentration is problematic. And the reason that the word concentration is problematic is because in the classical definition of first jhana, which in fact we've just read and we'll read again in a moment, in that classical definition of first jhana, the word concentration is not used. But that word is used in the second jhana. In the description of the second jhana is basically bringing the mind completely quiet. All right. Now, the whole idea of the noting that is done as part of the Mahasi method is to bring the mind into first jhana by paying attention to what's going on right now. That's what the noting is all about: is be here now, be here now.
Yeah,
What's happening
yeah,
right now?
yeah.
And yet,
And
a
if
lot of people don't get that connection.
yeah, but that's what actually I really like about it, because it's a very powerful tool for that, to just and also in the sense that if there are hindrances present, by noting them, um, it kind of achieves the same thing that I think you mean by cleaning out the mind.
Exactly.
It's more of a being aware that, for example, there's impatience as compared to being impatient. So more of a observing type, where the hindrances are not gone, in the sense that I'm no longer, like, I'm not blissed out or anything, but um, it's more being aware of them
Yes.
objectively, so to speak.
And there comes a time then when you are in fact free of that kind of noting, and that you in fact can then come to back to just the noting of touching, sitting, rising, falling, touching, sitting, rising, falling. Now, if you'll notice, the rising and falling are the first two steps of Anapanasati, and the touching and the sitting are actually, the touch is the body, sensory awareness, step 3 of Anapanasati. Also, the sitting is the proprioceptic or the internal feelings. Again, step 3 of Anapanasati. And a lot of people don't see that connection. The entire aspect of the Mahasi method is built on Anapanasati.
Yeah, but that was
Including,
that. How do people not see that? That's pretty obvious, even to me, and I'm not very knowledgeable about these things. So when you said that the first time that rising and falling relates to the breath, I was like, yeah, of course. What else would it relate to?
exactly. But a lot of people don't. And so what happens is they get attached to a method of doing things that they call Mahasi, not recognizing that it's just a way of talking about what the same thing that Bhikkhu Buddhadasa is talking about, or Goenka, or any of the others, but that what Bhikkhu Buddhadasa has is to going a little bit further than that, and that we mentioned this again in our last talk about Culadasa, doesn't even talk about the Four Noble Truths until kind of, I think it says, as an appendix or way late in the book, only in the sense
Yeah,
of just passing.
it's pretty indirect, I would say. I don't think there's a really direct discussion of that in the book at all.
Okay. So, um, basically, the Eightfold Noble Path is the path. The actual question is, what is the elimination of suffering? The answer is that that first jhana is a state of pleasure that is, in fact, at least temporary for now, free from suffering. So the question is, can you get up and ride your bicycle and go to town and go to work and go shopping and everything else in first jhana? If you can, then you've made it. Or another way of talking about it like that is to experiment with getting into that state and how long can it last. Because this is not a no mind state. This is still first jhana. This is not no mind. This is not second jhana. The thoughts are still there. And in fact, we want the thoughts to be there so that we can apply them and direct them in an investigation.
Yeah.
Okay. So once we get that done, then the next question is, what is it that's truly worthwhile investigating? If we can now direct our attention, then we will be able to choose based upon some kind of caliber of what's worth my attention now that I can actually direct it. Because before now, I did not direct my attention, it directed me.
Yeah.
Free association, Freud called it. But now that we can direct our attention, we have to decide what is wholesome and what is not wholesome. In the regard of what's and in fact, a better word for it is appropriate. And the appropriate means is that what's not appropriate to pay attention to are the things that don't increase, that they keep us stuck or they keep us in suffering. And then he listed in the sense of, who was I in the past? What was I in the past? What will I be in the future? And these are just the way that the Pali language is using about stuck in the past, thinking about What did I do in the past? How
Yeah.
did that go about, etc., like that. These are things that are unworthy of attention, and we've gotten beyond that now. So there's no longer, if we're going to be able to apply the mind to what's worthy of our attention, then we're going to not be doing that. That we're going to, in fact, apply the mind to things that are worthy of attention. Okay? So, from that perspective, I'd like to read another piece out of the sutra for you. I like these things. Good stuff. So, there we go. What are the things unfit for attention that he does not attend to? These are things such that when he attends to them, the unarisen taint of sensual arises in him, and also ill will and ignorance. And the arising taints of ignorance increases. These are, sorry, but Vicky Bodhi ellipsed those things out, so I have to go back and, because so he's actually talking about the second noble truth here. So when we're pay attention to things that are not worthy of paying attention to, some aspect of the second noble truth is going to arise or increase. Those things, those are the things unfit for attention that he does not attend to. And what are the things that are fit for attention that he does attend to? These are the things such that when he attends to them, the unarisen taint of sensual desire does not arise in him, etc., and the arisen taint of ignorance is abandoned. These are the things such that fit for attention that he attends to. By not attending to things unfit for attention and by attending to things fit for attention, the unarisen taints do not arise in him, and the origin taints are disbanded. So, and here's the key verse. He attends wisely. This is suffering. He attends wisely. This is the origins of suffering. He attends wisely. This is the cessation of suffering. And he attends wisely. This is the way leading to the cessation of suffering. When he attends wisely in this way, three fetters are abandoned in him: personality view, doubt, and adherence to rules and rituals. These are called the taints that should be abandoned by seeing. Okay? So these are the first three knowledges. Now, what I mean by the first three knowledge is one, that the that the student can see that no matter how clouded the mind can get, I can clean it out. The second knowledge is the knowledge of the first jhana, which I can apply and sustain my mind and keep it applied to something that I need to keep it on. And then this third aspect is, now that we've got that, what is it that's worthy of our attention? And the Buddha is now beginning to point out the way or the path. This is it. It is the Eightfold Noble Path built into the Four Noble Truths. So now that we have a mind that can be applied and directed, we need to apply that mind to suffering, to see what it's like inside and outside. We apply the mind to that cause of suffering, of the things that cause it, what are the things that create it, etc., like that. That can be done both inside and outside of jhana, but if you do it only outside of jhana, you'll miss out on many really good stuff. But if you're able to do it while you're in jhana, to really take a look at the nature and the cause of your own mind, to watch how it works, to watch it working while it's working.
Yeah. There's many different questions coming up for me, but I really like this.
Okay.
There's
Actually,
Go ahead.
this is not new. This has
Yeah.
been covered with you before, but that's the
Yeah.
nature of the Dhamma. It has to be done in layers, deeper and deeper and deeper. And I'm quite happy to go with you with this because I know that we're getting a little deeper into the way things work. And therefore, you are going to begin to have a lot of questions.
I feel
But
like at this point there's a lot of stuff coming together where I've heard the different elements before. I think I think I heard almost no, I think I actually heard everything that you just said before, but I've never heard it as a package where before it was more like distinct elements and now it's more of a cohesive, okay, start here, then we do this, and this is
then,
the reason why we do it. And then
uh,
when you can do that, you get here, and then you can get to the good stuff. Kind of
yes,
like it's more yeah, it's tied together nicely in that.
yes, it is. It really is nicely tied together. But the Mahasi system doesn't get the students to this point.
Okay, so what element is missing there?
Well, actually, hmm, it's very interesting like that. Um, because various schools will kind of stop the teaching at various levels in various states. A really clear example of that is that in Western Buddhism they almost never talk about the seven factors of enlightenment, and therefore it's almost never talked about in the sense that the seven factors of enlightenment are nothing but a restatement of the Eightfold Noble Path. Only now, when you're really successful at that stuff, and your mindfulness or your sati to remember to get back into first jhana and to stay there, when that becomes unremitting and so you can maintain this first jhana, now it becomes an enlightenment factor, that sati. Before that, it's a skill to be developed. Now we've got it as a skill, and so the sati is unremitting, and we can keep coming back and coming back and coming back because we're now so solid in that very first knowledge. No matter how obstructed the mind gets, out it comes.
Um, I guess if we really break it down to the bare level of practice and just in terms of what the practice looks like to do what we just talked about, it sounds to me like the beginning of the practice is more of a concentration practice to get into the first jhana. And I'm just going to say what it sounds like to me, and it's probably wrong because I asked this before, but it didn't become clear to me, so I'm just going to say it again. Basically, concentrate until you can get into the first jhana, then hang out there, so be in that state for a prolonged period of time, and then use that time to investigate reality, I guess. So investigate suffering. So, and what that translates to me in terms of like very practical steps is just investigating moment to moment experience. So whatever happens in that moment, investigate it in terms of, let's say, the Four Noble Truths, possibly three characteristics as well. So impermanence thrown in there as well for good measure, so to say. Um, is that anything like what you're talking about?
Yes, I, that sounds like a perfect summation, with one possibility, and that is to subtract the word concentration anywhere along that path, because the right use of the word concentration or real samadhi doesn't factor into this yet.
Okay.
That in fact is in second jhana, to where the word samadhi is actually used to describe it. And that possibly a good way of talking about it is that, let us say that there are two paths. The path of jhana that is a struggle because it's only a path of jhana, or there's a path of wisdom that has great joy in it. And in fact, if the jhana is not done correctly, a lot of it is struggle, competitive, comparative, and brings a lot of crap along with it, so that getting into the jhana states are actually more difficult. But
Okay.
it can be done to where the path of the Buddha, which I would not say the Mahasi method doesn't belong there. I'm just saying that, in fact, a way of looking at it is that it's culturally part of the Western baggage that they don't recognize. Oh, what a relief it is to be in this first jhana, to
Oh,
be
okay.
completely free. And so that's the whole idea of it, that this is rapture and pleasure, born of being free from a mind that wanders away, that you can put it where you want to. An example of this is that uh, you've had an argument with a friend, and you kind of half made up with him, and now you're sending him emails and he won't respond. So I've set this thing up so the mind is going to start burning.
Yeah.
The right thing to do is, if he responds to the email, I'll read it, and if he doesn't, then there's nothing to do now. Get it out of the mind.
Yeah.
Keep getting that out of the mind. Don't dwell on waiting for somebody to send an email. All right.
Yeah.
So that's a clear
Yeah.
example of that.
It's useless rumination.
Hmm.
I'm very, very prone to that. So I really appreciate that teaching. Um,
So that's one of the
yeah.
things then to become aware of. But that's step one. That's got nothing to do with jhana. That and everything to do with the statement of, hey, I can recognize it already, that that's suffering. That I do not want to have that repetitive thought about, where's my email? Oh, does he love me? Does he hate me? Did I pick my nose? You know what I'm talking about. That we begin to look for faults within ourselves, and we begin to compare ourselves to the other person,
Oh,
and we
yeah.
go right down a mental sewer.
I see you've been inside my head recently.
Pardon?
I see you've been inside of my head recently. You're giving good reports. No, actually, it's not all bad. I'm I'm kidding.
Let us say I have been inside the human mind,
Yeah. Yeah.
and you just carry a copy.
Yeah. So, I mean, in that sense, I really see how it kind of hooks into each other. Where so the way I understand first jhana now is basically this point that you just made of coming back, and basically coming back to the present moment, I guess, is another way of saying to throw out the hindrances, to basically say I don't need to be stuck in thoughts about the past. For example, if I'm regretting something, let's just come back to the present. For example, the feeling of rising, falling, of in breath, out breath, for
Exactly.
example. And in that sense, when you do that often enough and do it well enough, then the other factors of first jhana arise out of that. So I'm continuously directing my attention to the present moment, and well, sustaining it on there is another question, but basically the way I understand it is that out of basically secluding the mind from the hindrances again and again, there will arise the piti and sukha out of that. So by basically getting rid of the hindrances, we allow that other stuff to be there.
Yes. Now, that also has to do within anapanasati of actually cultivating or greasing the mind into joy, to actually take a step of gladdening the mind. All right, so, and here's really what's going on. When the mind wanders away and the individual catches the mind wandering away, and we actually see the dukkha, we don't really see the dukkha in itself. We make a judgment about the dukkha instead. And that then we get kind of the idea that meditation is hard, it's difficult. Many people will quit after one retreat, or sometimes they don't do much of this at all because they're missing this important step of anapanasati. Is, and I've talked to you about this before. This is a very basic step, but it is so basic that it has to be done on a regular occurring basis, over and over and over and over and over again. And the clear example that I have is, aha, I caught you. The
Yeah.
mind was wandering away and I didn't know it, but now I see it. I catch you at it. Aha, I can see
Yeah.
you.
That's the feeling of success.
The feeling of success. That is what generates. So when the mind actually becomes free from these hindrances, that's a whole pile of little successes, a whole pile of ahas, I've caught you, and now I can recognize you're not there at all, and oh, what a relief it is. So one of the examples of it, in fact, I have to say my favorite example, because you guys have to do it so much. Every day you have to go out. Many times you go out and you go to places you've never been before. Whenever you go to places that you've never been before, you have to be kind of on alert. You have to start reading signs. You have to figure out where you are. You may, in fact, think about, I'm lost, or I don't know what's going on now. And the mind gets really confused and filled with doubt. But after that errand is run, you come home, you feel really complete, or happy, in the sense that the mind is no longer in that state of doubt or confusion and having to figure out which way is this and which way is that. Now you can say, when the mind is caught in hindrances, it's like being out there in that jungle. And when you free the mind from those hindrances, it's like coming home.
Yeah.
So that's one of the examples. That's why it feels so good. It feels good because and I've actually experienced that really, really clearly directly last month when I had to go to Bangkok, which is the first time I've left the island in 5 years or so.
Yeah, makes sense. I guess I'm still not entirely clear on your conception of first jhana, because there's, again, different ways that people talk about it, and I'm not entirely sure which way you are using. So there's...
Well, let me skip over to a sutta that I don't use very often with students, but we're fully into it. So, sutta that I'm about to read for you is out of sutta number 119. You know, we trudge through 118 and 117 often, but here in 119, again, bhikkhus, quite secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states. Bango. So when you have thoughts of, I want this and I want that, I'm hungry, what's in the mental refrigerator, or what's in the mental panties, all of all of that kind of stuff is desire. But when the mind is free from sensual pleasure, secluded from unwholesome states, a bhikkhu enters and abides in the first jhana, which is accompanied by applied and sustained thought, with the rapture and pleasure born of that seclusion. He makes the rapture and pleasure born of seclusion drench, steep, fill, and pervade the body, so that there is no part of this whole body unpervaded by the rapture and pleasure born of seclusion. In other words, this is actually step 3 on steroids in the sense of investigating the body. Because now you're doing it with a mind that's fit for work. And in that regard, you can find all kinds of things come up. The hair will stand on the arm, goosebumps, chills come up the back, the legs tingle, all kinds of stuff. Stuff just pervades the body. Just as a skilled bathman or a bathman apprentice heaps bath powder on a metal basin and sprinkling it gradually with water, kneads it till the moisture wets the ball of bath powder, soaks it and pervades it, and in and out, yet that ball does not ooze. As so too, the bhikkhu makes the rapture and pleasure born of seclusion drench, dwell, fill, and pervade the body, so that there is no part of the body unpervaded by this rapture and pleasure born of seclusion. As he abides thus diligently, this is how the bhikkhu develops mindfulness of the body. Okay, so the mindfulness of the body, kaya nupassana, in fact, you see, it's almost like Culadasa has been put into a box that he does not belong in, and Mahasi does not belong in the box that we put him in. There is no distinction between the two. It's merely a way of expressing it. Of which topic do you cover first?
Okay, yeah, I see. I've heard that formulation as well, where, yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. So, now that we know what the first jhana is, it's really based upon that full, firm knowledge of the seclusion of the hindrances. That, boy, I'm really free from that. Wow, I don't have to think about that anymore. An example for me is the United States of America is just off limits. Country non grata.
Is it the case that when we're abiding in first jhana that let's say distractions or thoughts about the past do not come up anymore? So the hindrances...
They are chased out so quickly.
Okay.
They are really, really chased out really quickly.
Okay.
So if they do enter the mind, they do not invade the mind to stay. They are immediately chased out.
Okay.
Okay. Kind of like one of the ways that the mind works is that we have, through perception, that we'll have normally a visual mental flash followed by a dialogue description. Almost as if the mind is organized the way television is, or like, in fact, cartoons. That we see the cartoon and then we read the caption.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what we're actually saying now is with those hindrances that we can see the cartoon, but we don't bother to read the caption. Out immediately, out.
Okay. So that's the applied effort to basically be vigilant, not to fall into that again.
Exactly. Exactly so. This is one's right effort. Now, once the experience becomes resolute to continue to do this, the more resolute you are at this practice, the more successful you are at it, which means the less effort it takes. This is very much like bodybuilding,
Hmm.
except
Yeah.
now we're building the mind, and we're
Yeah.
building the mind with 4 qualities. Those 4 qualities, number one and the most important on this list is sati, to remember. In this regard, to remember to look at what's going on, to remember what's happening with the mind, to not just get lost in feelings and lost in space, but to wake up. And so in English, we've used the word mindfulness, and I don't really mind that word, except that it's such an unusual word that the only time we ever use the word is when we're talking about sati. So let's talk about sati directly, because I don't know of any other use for the word mindfulness. I've heard the expression of mind your P's and Q's, or
Hmm.
mind what you're doing. And so I suppose mindfulness would come from watching or looking, okay? Or in the Mahasi method would be called noting.
Yeah.
But that's not what sati is. What sati is to remember to do that. That in fact, that noting quality would be part of the investigation,
Yes. Yeah.
okay? Which
Yeah.
would be
Okay.
its twin.
So in that sense, when the situation arises that we meditate or I meditate and we forget to, we basically forget that we're meditating, right? So a thought comes up
Yep.
and it kind of takes you away into fantasy land. That's a lapse of mindfulness, because in that sense you've forgotten your intention to, uh, let's say, stay with the breath.
Or whatever your object is.
Yeah, whatever the meditation is about. So,
Mhm.
or when, let's say, a strong hindrance comes up and like a strong emotion and it takes you away, it kind of, that's a failure, or let's say that's lacking mindfulness.
Yes, these are two ways of looking at it. And we want to begin to change our attitude from that. That it is not a failure. Why? Because sati has come to see it.
Right,
All
right.
right. Think of it like this: that we're it's a Western movie, and we're a wagon train, and we've circled the wagons, and the Indians are all around us. And now the cavalry comes. We can hear the trumpet. Da, 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 da. And that's the time that we remorse. Oh, this is so bad that the Indians have circled the wagon. No, the Indians have been circling the wagons for the past 5 minutes, and and the cavalry did not come.
Yeah,
Now we should be joyful. The cavalry has come.
yeah. I guess in that sense, the more correct way I should have said it is in that moment when we forget. So when a thought comes up that takes us away, there's no mindfulness in that moment. But then sometime later, we realize what's happened. We wake up to the fact that we've been lost in thought. Then we come back. So that's the moment of where mindfulness comes online or kicks back
Yes,
in. Yeah,
and that should be a joyful moment, not a disappointing moment.
yeah, yeah. I didn't mean it in that sense.
Well, that's where the joy comes from. That intentional change of our attitude from it's a failure when the mind forgot into it is so marvelous that the cavalry has come to, to break up this circled wagon and Indian affair.
So to really get into the nitty gritty here, um, when does the first jhana territory imply that this sort of forgetting no longer happens? In other words,
Yes,
if that
right,
forgetting is still going on, it cannot by definition be first jhana.
exactly. In the first jhana, uh, For some reason the analogy breaks down because the analogy with the bugle charge was sati coming in. Okay. So once the sati is coming in, you can imagine then that the first jhana is later when the village is completely established and the Indian population is integrated. The likelihood of having to circle our wagons and protect from an Indian attack is not there anymore. We're beyond that kind of place. So that's kind of a way of looking at it from that analogy, but it doesn't quite fit because all of a sudden the Indians are back and the wagons are circled and stuck in my mental warfare. But here comes the cavalry. Oh, I'm so happy to see the cavalry coming again.
So in that sense, would you refer to that as access concentration? Because that is kind of the definition I've heard, where access concentration has to do with the ability to stay on the object of meditation without forgetting in that way.
Yeah, let us say that this is right on the cusp. So there's some territory that has to be crossed to get the mind out of hindrances and across the territory that we're defining as access concentration. And the way that you defined it as right at the door going into first jhana. But you also have to recognize that jhana is not a particular state, it's also a process, and it has a journey. Okay, and the journey through first jhana has to do with, again, waking up the body in pleasure. So Goenka's method of scanning the body would be most useful for students who are already in first jhana. And the idea is that, okay, if that's what we're going to be doing, then let's hope that we can get them into first jhana in the first 3 days.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really happen, not every time, because there's a few things that are left out. Is perhaps the Hindis are better at it than the Westerners are.
It might just be plain not enough time for people to get there.
Just not enough time. So the package of the retreat time is too compressed.
Yeah, maybe they would have to double the length and do like a week of just trying to get there.
There's a lot of different longer courses.
Okay, so on with my questions, and I really like this because I'm getting to shoot out all my questions, and this really clears up a whole lot of territory.
Please be aware that we're still working at the doorstep of step 3 and pounding step 2, and I've got 7 steps to get through, so we're not going to do it today.
Yeah, I actually have to go in like 10-15 minutes, so.
All right, so we'll leave it as a 3-step out of 7. So you got 3 of the first steps of a tango.
So the way I understand the Mahasi tradition, there's no preliminary step of getting the mind into first jhana before we start investigating. So the way I understand it is just...
Well, the noting is supposed to, when the noting becomes successful, it will take one into first jhana. So that you can actually note and note and note and note and note very, very steadily. The question then is, what are you going to start noting next?
Oh, okay.
Rather than letting it be random, we're going to now, because we got the mind into first jhana, we can apply and sustain that. So the next question is, what is always the real important question is once the mind is fit for work, what are we going to put it to work on?
Yeah.
Okay. Are we going to put it to work on deeper states of concentration? Or are we going to put it into research? You would be surprised at how many scientists and observers and people like that actually fall into first jhana from time to time without developing it as a skill. But when they're in that state, they can get a lot of really good work done because
Yeah.
what they're focusing is on their work. An example of that is code.
Mm.
Writing code. You can fall into the first jhana and you can really get some stuff done
Mm.
because you're really applying and keeping the mind focused on it. That's what we're talking about here. And it's pleasurable. Nobody wants to leave that state. So the programmer is sitting there at his desk at night and he's got the whole world to himself and he's got his computer out and he's doing his thing and it just and the boss comes in and what are you doing here? And the guy's not even going to turn around. He's not even he's in his
Yeah.
code and heck with the fact that the boss has walked in.
I guess at least it could be said that there's no explicit focus on developing, let's say, rapture and pleasure in the Mahasi system, as far as I'm aware of it, and maybe that's just lack of awareness on my part, but are you saying that it's more of a, let's say, side effect, where if you do that practice correctly, you will kind of like, not automatically, but as a matter of course, it will take you to that first jhana territory?
Yes, okay. So let's look at that analogy that was used. My grandmother used to make biscuits, and she did exactly the way that the bathman does it. And that is that she lays the flour out on the table, and then she dips her fingers in the water, and she'll start sprinkling the water with her fingertips onto the dry meal, and eventually starts to work it with her hands. She gets the dough all over and she scrapes it off, and then she gets a little bit more water, and she does it to where the dough gets really sticky so that it can get into a ball. Okay, so that bath powder is doing the same thing. So what we're looking at then would be the normal human being is that bath powder dry, and that the water is joy. And
Hmm.
right from the very beginning, we're going to start sprinkling joy. If you will, then this is really where the analogy of wet and dry comes from. Dry means that you're not practicing up to the level you need to be at, and you're still dealing with hindrances, to where the joy comes in with this water analogy of taking it from the dry dough or the dry powder into a ball of it's not oozing. It's just enough together, just like my grandmother. She got it just enough together to make biscuits out of it. So it's
Hmm.
going to hold together as opposed to being dusty. So once that bath powder has been kneaded into place, so once my grandmother's dough is into place, a gust of wind can blow the window open, and the room is not going to be filled with a cloud of dust or a cloud of bath powder or a cloud of flour, because it's unified now and being held together with this water
Yeah.
in that way. And so this is a really excellent analogy for how to get the mind into first jhana, as well as the understanding of why it's so valuable, because it has that quality of unification, as well as the unifying process has to do with the development of pleasure. To let that pleasure of being free from the hindrances pervade the whole body. Oh, this feels so nice. Ah,
Yeah, I guess these last two sentences, um, I don't find, for example, in the writings of Mahasi Sayadaw, and I've
he's talking to a less mature audience.
okay.
He's always addressing the beginners.
Hmm. I guess the question is, could we, just by the sheer fact that we're coming back over and over to the noting, for example, cultivate that pleasure without even having the instructions? That's what it seems like to me, that it kind of accidentally, so to
It
speak.
came naturally. It happens to people naturally. Listen to our language. I curled up with a good book. Great pleasure is found in that mind that can sustain itself and keep track of what's going on. One of the most important qualities of mathematics is the kids who can do it can keep concentrating or paying attention to it until they understand it. They can pick it apart. And by getting that understanding, great joy arises. And the kids who don't feel frustration. And guess who's going to become the mathematician? Who's going to be the physicist in the family?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so that's how it works.
Yeah. In that sense, it's just a matter of, I guess it all boils down again to the attitude, right? So in your view, it all comes down to the attitude, because if I have the correct attitude of feeling successful whenever my mindfulness kicks in, I will kind of be on the right track towards first jhana. Whereas if I have the attitude of like punishing myself, for example, every time I notice that the mind has wandered, I will be going in the wrong direction. So suppose
You'll be going in the same direction you've always been going in, and you're the one who's calling it wrong.
I mean, I will definitely not be in the direction of first jhana, or insight for that matter, or wisdom, or anything else. So
Yes.
suppose I was doing just a noting practice, but so I had this experience where I was noting, and I was actually, so previously I was doing Culadasa system, and then I kind of switched to noting, and just to see what happens on, like, just to experiment was one of the motivations, at least. And I found that the more open approach of just noting whatever arises, in that sense, not being so strictly, or, I mean, tightly sounds too negative, but not that restricted focus of staying very, very much with the breath at the nose, for example. In that sense, I guess it feeds into that sense of success, because if you can remain with the noting, whatever arises, so in that sense, it's not really important if a thought arises, because as long as you note it, you're doing it right. And that kind of, I feel like, took the pressure off, and it was more of a subconscious pressure that I didn't even know was there, where basically as long as you can keep up the noting, keep up the awareness, it doesn't matter what comes up. And in that sense, it kind of, I like the fact that you don't have to cultivate anything. It's just, you can be fine with whatever comes up. And in the sense that even when a hindrance comes up, as long as you note it, you're doing it right.
That's what you need to cultivate, is that sati. You're calling it noting, and I'm calling it sati, because when you use the word noting, it actually has baggage with it that sati doesn't have. Okay?
Yeah. I'm just using that as an example where I noticed the difference.
But it's the same thing. It's exactly the same thing, though. And I would go so far as to say that when you see a thought come up and then you judge it, that's almost like that you're someone who is practicing getting ready to go into the first jhana, and then you fall out of it because you are accusing yourself of not being able to do second jhana. In other words, you're ahead of the game.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
All right. That you're not going to be able to get rid of those thoughts until you're actually able to be joyfully happy throughout your entire body, to really pervade the body with this joy, this pleasure, this rapture that is so clearly defined in the sutta of how important the rapture is, but it's born of the seclusion of the mind. from hindrances. That's the important quality of the joy comes from, as it were, how to think about it. The getting into jhana is very much like the joy that a bouncer has
Yeah,
in kicking a patron out of the bar.
yeah. I've read the analogy of mindfulness is the gatekeeper, so the guard at the gate, and it kind of scrutinizes everyone who passes through. So no one gets by uh, unseen.
Okay. I use the bouncer analogy as one step further because sometimes that guard has to actually go into the bar and grab somebody and throw him out.
Yeah,
Sometimes he lets somebody in and now they're making a ruckus and out they go.
I've, I guess, I think I've noticed this mechanism in my mind where if I try, and this is not meant as a criticism, this is just me kind of not getting it right, is um, by trying to cultivate, let's say, for example, pleasure, there will be this subtle mechanism of dissatisfaction when there is no pleasure. And I've found that by giving up on that goal and just really saying, I don't even cultivate anything in this practice, I'm just going to be mindful all the time. Just note everything that comes up. And I'm just using the noting because that's how I've kind of come to that. But um, of saying, okay, here's a hindrance. So I would note, let's say, I don't know, anger, or there's a thought, and I would note thinking. And by kind of being okay with the fact that these things are happening, that's for me a much more relaxed approach, even though I know that uh, the other approach of kind of subtly being averse to the fact that this is going on is not the correct way. But I've been somewhat unable to snap out of that. So this is kind of sidestepping the problem for me.
Okay. When that when a thought comes, begin to think of it as a pony that you can ride. Rather than a dangerous thing that has to be chased away.
Yeah,
Okay? Begin to understand that it is the thought is going to be controlled best by what? Making friends with it, or um,
yeah,
basically we go down to the point of applied and directing these thoughts. So the fact that you can still think is a quality of the first jhana. Being free from thought is a second jhana. But we've already gone through that the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Noble Path, and seeing how the mind works is a job for first jhana.
yeah,
Because you
yeah.
cannot walk
Okay.
around in second jhana all the time. We're going to work it so that we're going to be in first jhana all the time, and we're going to really like it.
Yeah. One thing I've noticed that when I started this little noting experiment was that my mind was much more powerful than I had previously thought. So I would be able, and this is not all the time, but pretty frequently, let's say every couple of minutes or maybe every minute, I would be able to really perceive some very detailed stuff happening to the point where, let's say, a noise would happen, like an actual physical noise, and I would be able to perceive that this is happening. Then, like some sort of reaction would take place in the mind of um, maybe liking or not liking. Then some thoughts would start coming up, and maybe even an intention would come up to maybe I don't know, open the eyes and check what's happening, and then the actual action would happen. And so I would get these kind of bursts of what I would see as this is probably investigation, right?
Yes,
So
exactly so. And congratulations that you're beginning to do that. That's excellent.
Yeah, and I was really pleased with that because previously doing more of the Culadasa type practice in my own probably incorrect way, um, I wasn't perceiving that my mind could do that, and I always thought that like that was way more advanced than where I was. So I was really happy that I could see that, and I could see like within a second, or let's say within an out breath, I would be able to see many different things, like 5, 6 different things as distinct, like just seeing intentions come up
The
as a
mind is
separate thing.
fast.
Yeah,
Buddha has the sutta. The mind is fast, O monks. It is so fast I don't even have an analogy of how fast the mind is. And now you're seeing that. Congratulations.
yeah,
Continue to watch that. Begin to see how fast that mind is. And in regard to the noting, recognize how much time the mind takes to do that noting process
yeah,
so that you can break this down between the two kinds of witnesses that we're talking about.
yeah.
So you can begin to see.
It would definitely get to the point where I could not label at all because things were just happening way too fast, and like at least 10 times too fast to know to label, because
Exactly so.
it's really clunky. It's like
Mhm.
it's more of a slow process, whereas the things I would be able to witness in the or to perceive, I guess, or just to be aware of, were much faster, like way faster.
Actually, that's true. A way of thinking about it, or a way of noticing this, is that, in fact, the perception of the human mind is the slowest, clunkiest, and the most amazing part of the human mind. The ability to perceive, not to be conscious or aware of something, but to manufacture it into a mental product.
Okay, yeah,
All right. And so what we're going to do is start playing with both sides of that. Both of these kind of witnesses, the one who was actually manufacturing a story and the other one who was just Johnny on the spot and saw what happened.
so would you say that it would be beneficial or skillful to kind of infuse, for example, a noting practice more with that attitude of joy and success? Would that be enough to kind of stay with your instructions, or is that not enough?
Yeah, I would say go for that.
Yeah,
Go for that. But if you're
yeah,
going to make a mistake on one side or the other, make the mistake on more joy.
yeah. The reason I like this practice is it really takes the pressure off, and I've since seen that I was subtly, like really subtly, putting pressure on myself to do things
I
correctly.
I know. That's what in fact Culadasa warns about that in his book.
Yeah, I
But the
recently,
students, they
yeah, I have been in the past been better about that. So it has worked. Um, I've had periods of time where this has not been a problem, or way less of a problem, let's say. But I've I've since like I've been dealing with this same problem in different layers and in different iterations of it for a long time now, and it feels skillful to me to just explore this other option that
it
is
is.
more it's more in the language of you don't need to achieve anything. It's like it's not even explicitly trying
Have
to
you heard me
achieve.
say that?
Well, I mean, we're cultivating pleasure, we're cultivating a feeling of success. So in that sense, there's a clear agenda, let's say, and that's probably more of my take on it than yours. But
Okay. Actually, perhaps an important way of saying it is that you're already enlightened.
hmm,
Why don't you enjoy that?
yeah, I've really
The answer is
resonated.
we don't feel enlightened. So what do
Yeah,
we get to do to recognize that we're already enlightened?
yeah. I've really resonated with the description of just be mindful of whatever arises. And that kind of naturally leads me to that feeling of, oh, cool, I'm able to note all these tiny little things. And even though many of those things are unskillful, so they're distractions and they're thoughts and they're hindrances, but I'm pretty good at noting them. So in
Yes,
that
that's
sense,
pretty
I
good
don't
at
care.
noting them. That's success. That's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
And and
You're getting
oh,
good at it. And congratulate yourself.
that's yeah. I like that this has worked out so that it kind of fits back in with what you were saying. I like that. It's
Yes.
funny how that works, where all these different approaches come down to like
Well,
not
every
the exact
teacher
same
has
thing, but
his own style. Every teacher has his own style. And um, possibly the right way of saying it is that I had a lot of different teachers. I could boil it down to four main teachers, but that was not just one teacher. Four teachers is not one teacher. All right, but I've actually had quite a number of teachers, and that every student should be that way. In fact, the more super dedicated we are to one teacher without having experienced other teachers, we've got no basis of foundation for our devotion, so it's going to be rooted in doubt, not in knowledge.
or blind faith.
Yes, blind faith, cult material.
Yeah.
No, I want you to do this kind of investigation so that you can understand that there is actually, how to say, there is the Buddha's path, and that there are many approaches from different teachers trying to point out to the students how to get onto the path.
Yes, that's exactly what I wanted to say as well, where these instructions kind of implicitly got me to the place that you wanted me to get to all the time, like all these past months. I feel like it's just by not explicitly stating it, it has kind of tricked me into doing it right, you know?
But that's very common. That's also very common.
Yeah. Okay, good.
So one of the jobs of a teacher is to be patient,
Yeah.
which is actually a skill to be developed.
So, uh, I've got to go pretty soon, but um, previously, previously you were saying that we were still on the, I think, second or third step of the seven steps. Was that about the seven factors of enlightenment?
No, no, but we'll get into that also. No, this is actually the seven steps that I've mentioned to you before that are in Sutta number 48, and I'm going through them in order. The first one is no matter how obstructed the mind is, the student knows that he can clear out the mind. The second knowledge is the knowledge of first jhana and the experience and perhaps control. The third knowledge is the introduction to the Four Noble Truths, with the introduction that goes to the point that the student recognizes this is it. There is no other teaching, no other system that I could follow that quite matches up to the teachings of the Buddha of the Four Noble Truths. Once we get to that point, that's also the eradication of those three fetters of personality view, um, doubt, and attachments to rites, rules, and rituals. That's the end of the third knowledge. And that can be stated is that there is no other teaching like this. This is the teaching that I am now determined and bound to follow. This is also normally what would be called the pivot point in the practice of the Sotapan between the path of Sotapan and the fruit of Sotapan. So we're now beginning to experience the fruit of Sotapan. Let us finish that part of it later.
Yeah, the reason I asked was to kind of put that down in my notes so I could get us back right on track the next time we talk.
Excellent. So imagine it's like a teeter-totter. The first part of the climb is uphill till you get to the midpoint. And now the next little footstep and the whole teeter-totter changes now, and now you're running downhill.
That's the fruit then, kind of
And
getting to enjoy the fruit.
Enjoying the fruit.
Looking forward to it.
Okay. Then have a big belly laugh on me and experience it right here and now.
All right.
All right, Martin, we'll see you later.
Thank you so much for your time today.
Excellent. See you soon.
Bye.